Greetings, everyone. It is Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We are now starting the Last Guardian, which is the last full-length novel that we will read before we start playing the games. And we just have a couple little bits of chronicles left too. We'll kind of sprinkle those in here throughout this book whenever we will need a palate cleanser or something like that. I see that we've got the serpent at the front. They mentioned that in the last book. I pictured it more like a dragon because it said that it had little claws, I thought. But, I mean, maybe that's what it looks like. Then you've got those two iconic figures. So this is called The Last Guardian. This is by Jeff Grubb. That's a name that's familiar to me. He has written Dungeons and Dragons books. I know, like, I was a big fan of the Dragonlance series. I kind of think he's written pieces of the later ones of that and probably a couple other sprinkled little books, in addition to having worked on other popular fantasy books. So he's a more established artist. You know what we never did read in the last book, actually? I'm going to pause and look at that real quick. Let's go into this series that we have here. I want to look at this. We never looked at about the author of Old Christie Golden. She is the award-winning author of 28 novels and over a dozen short stories in the fields of fantasy, science fiction, and horror. Her media tie-in works include launching the Ravenloft line in 1991 with Vampires and Myths. So I wonder if she launched the campaign setting with that book. Introduced her just to Elven Vampire Gender Sunstar, and it will be reprinted in 2006 over a dozen Star Trek novels, including Voyager fiction set after the TV series in the Warcraft novel Lord of the Clans, which is another one of these older novels. I don't know when we're going to read that because I think that's closer to Warcraft, the World of Warcraft, but that's one of on the horizon. Original fiction, Dancers, on Fire's Wings in Stone's Clasp. And she plays World of Warcraft. Okay, so that was all we really had with that one. I just wanted to I was curious after we read a book by her. Okay, I'm not going to read this because these tend to be just something we're going to see more. Like we'll reread it later. So this one came out in 2002. So this is this is 4 years earlier than the other ones. This is quite an old book. This predates World of Warcraft. It's re-released in 2016 here, but yeah, this is our first. This book came out maybe around Warcraft 3 time period. So now for everything that we need, that's fine, but that's interesting. This says to Chris Metzen, who kept the vision. I'm pretty sure he's a big D&D guy. Okay, so like I said before, we've got 16 chapters plus a prologue and an epilogue, and this book's about 50-ish pages less than the others. So, all right, let's get to it. Stay a while and listen to the prologue. This one has named chapters. This one's called The Lonely Tower. The larger of the two moons had risen first this evening, and now hung pregnant and silver white against a clear, star-dappled sky. I didn't know there was two moons in Azeroth. Maybe I just forgot that, because I think we read that in War of the Ancients too. Beneath the lambent moon, the peaks of the Red Ridge Mountains strained for the sky. In the daylight, the sun picked out hues of magenta and rust among the great granite peaks, but in the moonlight, they were reduced to tall, proud ghosts. To the west lay the forest of Elwyn, its heavy canopy of great oaks and satinwoods running from the foothills to the sea. To the east, the bleak swamp of the Black Morass spread out, a land of marshes and low hills, bayous and backwaters, failed settlements, and lurking danger. A shadow passed briefly across the moon, a raven-sized shadow, bearing for a hole in the heart of the mountain. Yeah, and I guess Westfall is technically part of this. So yeah, you can see how this is definitely a little bit predating World of Warcraft already, just from the geography. Here a chunk had been pulled from the fastness of the Red Ridge Range, leaving behind a circular veil. Once it might have been the site of some primeval celestial impact or the memory of an earth-shaking explosion, but the eons had worn the bowl-shaped crater into a series of steep-edged, rounded hillocks, which were now cradled by the steeped mountains surrounding them. None of the ancient trees of Elwyn could reach its altitude, and the interior of the ringed hills was barren save for weeds and tangled vines. At the center of the ringed hills lay a bare tor, as bald as the pate of a Kultiras merchant lord. Indeed, the very way the hillock rose steeply, then gentled to a near-level slope at its apex, was similar in shape to a human skull. Many had noted it over the years, though only a few had been sufficiently brave or powerful or tactless to mention it to the property's owner. At the flattened peak of the tor rose an ancient tower, a thick, massive protrusion of white stone and dark mortar, a man-made eruption that shot effortlessly into the sky, scaling higher than the surrounding hills, lit like a beacon by the moonlight. There was a low wall at the base of the tower surrounding a bailey, and within those walls the tumble-down remain of a stable and a smithy, but the tower itself dominated all within the ringed hills. Once this place was called Karazhan. Once it was home of the last of the mysterious and secretive guardians of Tirisfal. Once it was a living place. Now it was simply abandoned and time-lost. So this must be the future. There was silence upon the tower, but not a stillness. In the night's embrace, quiet shapes flitted from window to window, and phantoms danced along the balconies and parapets. Less than ghosts, but more than memories, these were nothing less than pieces of the past that had become unstuck from the flow of time. These shadows of the past had been pried loose by the madness of the tower's owner, and were now condemned to play out their histories again and again in the silence of the abandoned tower. Condemned to play, but denied of any audience to appreciate them. So I wonder if Karazhan in that form is encountered in like Warcraft 3 or something like that, or if the game itself is paying homage to these books. Then in the silence there was the soft scrape of a booted foot against stone, then another. A flash of movement beneath the lambent moon, a shadow against the white stone, a flutter of a tattered red-hued cloak in the cool night air. A figure walked along the topmost parapet, on the crenellated uppermost spire that years before had served as an observatory. The parapet door into the observatory screeched open on ancient hinges, then stopped, frozen by rust and the passage of time. The cloaked figure paused a moment, then placed a finger on the hinge, and muttered a few choice words. The door swung open silently, the hinges made as if new. The trespasser allowed himself a smile. The observatory was empty now. What tools that remained smashed and abandoned. The trespassing figure, almost as silent as a ghost himself, picked up a crushed astrolabe, its scale twisted in some now forgotten rage. Now it is merely a heavy piece of gold, inert and useless in his hands. There was other movement in the observatory, and the trespasser looked up. Now a ghostly figure stood nearby, near one of the many windows. The ghost non-ghost was a broad-shouldered man, hair and beard once dark but now going to a premature gray at the edges. The figure was one of the shards of the past, unglued and now repeating its task regardless of whether it had observers or not. For the moment the dark-haired man held the astrolabe, the unbroken twin to the one in the trespasser's hands, and fiddled with the small knob along one side. A moment, a check, and a twitch of the knob, his dark brows furrowed over ghostly green eyes. A second moment, another check, and another twitch. Finally the tall, imposing figure sighed deeply and placed the astrolabe on a table that was no longer there, and vanished. The trespasser nodded. Such hauntings were common even in the days when Karazhan was inhabited, though now, stripped of the control and the madness of their master, they had become more brazen. Yet these shards of the past belonged here, while he did not. He was the interloper, not they. The trespasser crossed the room to its staircase leading down, while behind him the older man flickered back into the view and repeated his action, sighting his astrolabe on a planet that had long since moved to other parts of the sky. The trespasser moved down through the tower, crossing levels to reach other stairs and other hallways. No door was shut to him, even those locked and bolted or sealed by rust and age. A few words, a touch, a gesture, and the fetters flew loose, the rust dissolved into ruddy piles, the hinges restored. In one or two places ancient wards still glowed, potent despite their age. He paused before them for a moment, considering, reflecting, searching his memory for the correct countersign. He spoke the correct word, made the correct motion with his hands, shattered the weak magic that remained, and passed on. As he moved through the tower, the phantoms of the past grew more agitated and more active. Now, with a potential audience, it seemed that these pieces of the past wished to play themselves out, if only to be made free of this place. Any sound they once possessed had long since eroded away, leaving only their images moving through the halls. The interloper passed an ancient butler in dark livery, the frail old man shuffling slowly down the empty hallway, carrying a silver tray and wearing a set of horse blinders. The interloper passed through the library, where a green-fleshed young woman stood with her back to him, poring over an ancient tome. He passed through a banquet hall, at one end a group of musicians playing soundlessly, dancers twirling in a gavotte. At the other end, a great city burned, its flames beating ineffectively against the stone walls and rotting tapestry. The trespasser moved through the silent flames, but his face grew drawn and tense as he witnessed once again the mighty city of Stormwind burn around him. In one room, 3 young men sat around a table and told unknown lies, now unknown lies. Metal mugs were scattered on the table's surface, as well as beneath it. The trespasser stood watching this image for a long time until a phantom tavernist brought another round. Then he shook his head and pressed on. He reached nearly the ground level and stepped out on a low balcony that hung precariously to the wall like a wasp's nest over the main entrance. There, in the wide space before the tower, between the main entrance and the now collapsed stables across the bailey, stood a single ghostly image, lonely and separated. It did not move like the others, but rather stood there, waiting, tentative, a piece of the past that had not been released, a piece that was waiting for him. The immobile image was of a young man with a skunk stripe of white running through his dark, untidy head of hair. The straggling fragments of a beard newly grown clung to his face. A battered rucksack lay at the youth's feet, and he held a red-sealed letter with a death-like grip. This was well and truly no ghost, the trespasser knew, though the owner of this image may yet be dead, fallen in combat beneath a foreign sun. This was a memory, a shard of the past trapped like an insect in amber, waiting for its release, waiting for his arrival. The trespasser sat on the stonework ledge of the balcony and looked out beyond the bailey, beyond the hillock, and beyond the ringed hills. There was silence in the moonlight, as the mountains themselves seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for him. The trespasser lifted a hand and intoned a series of chanted words. Softly came the rhymes and rhythms the first time, then louder, and finally louder still, shattering the calm. In the distance, wolves picked up his chant and cast it back in howling counterpoint. In the image of the ghostly youth, its feet seemingly trapped in mud, took a deep breath, hoisted his rucksack of secrets to his shoulder, and slogged his way toward the main entrance of Medivh's tower. Okay. So this interloper could be Medivh himself come back. Although that to me seems, there were some things that made that seem slightly unlikely. I think there's a decent chance that this is Khadgar. Considering he was invited, the memory could be Medivh. It could be Khadgar. I think it could be either. But I do think this is notable that this book is written before the game comes out, and Karazhan, as it's described in Chronicles and now, is established, and we have some decent pieces of geography. Now, those geography definitely existed in the previous games. But that makes me curious if I'm going to pay attention when we play these Warcraft games. And but there's got to be Karazhan in one of those games. If not, it is in World of Warcraft. They 100% honored old Jeff Grubb here. Okay, another episode in the pipes, 5x5. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.